Hello, this is Eric Lloyd, master's student in clinical psychology, neuropsychology concentration. Speaking a little bit lower today because I don't want to wake up people in the house who are sleeping, work. I want to read this book. Didn't get a chance to read it all. Once heard readers are leaders, and I like to read and understand from multiple perspectives, stances, um, opinions, whether it's subjective or even different reasoning styles from people from all walks of life, because that's what I do as a psychologist, as a psychology student, as a therapist. I'm not a psychologist because I have not taken the EPPP. I'm not a therapist yet because I have not taken the EPPP, but I do have a master's in psychology, neuropsychology concentration. This book is from is called one of the Four Horsemen. Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, New York Times bestseller. I haven't had time to read it, but now I do have time to read many of the books in my small library. I work at a library and I appreciate books from anywhere, any persuasion, any religion, any bit of knowledge, any perspective, to know more and to learn more, to appreciate more, and to connect more. Now that I'm not actively reading or in school at the moment, because right now essential work is taking the forefront, and non-essential work is taking a back seat, and I'm not focusing on getting my license right now. I thought it would be good to catch up on reading, so that I keep up not only cultural competence but different perspectives, and I'm able to switch them and transverse knowledge bases very easily. So this is a preface. I'll just start with the preface. Let's start with the preface. Preface to the paperback edition. The God Delusion, in the hardback edition, was widely described as a surprise bestseller of 2006. It was warmly received by the great majority of those who sent in their personal reviews to Amazon, more than 1,000 at the time of writing. Approval was less overwhelming in the printed reviews. However, a cynic might put this down to an unimaginative reflex of reviews editors. It has God in the title, so sending it to a known faith head. So sent it to a known faith head. That would be too cynical, however. Several unfavorable reviews began with the phrase, which I long ago learned to treat as ominous, but I'm an atheist, but, ... As Daniel Dennett noted in Breaking the Spell, a baffling large number of intellectuals believe in belief, even though they lack religious belief themselves. These vicarious second-order believers are often more zealous than the real thing. Their zeal pumped by an ingratiating broad-mindedness. Alas, I can't share your faith, but I respect and sympathize with it. I'm an atheist, but the sequel is nearly always unhelpful, nihilistic, or worse, suffused with a sort of exultant negativity. Notice, by the way, the distinction from another favorite genre. I used to be an atheist, but that is one of the oldest tricks in the book, much favored by religious apologists from C.S. Lewis to the present day. It serves to establish some sort of street cred up front. It is amazing how often it works. Look out for it. I wrote an article for the website richarddawkins.net called "I'm an Atheist, But," and I borrowed it from the following list of critical or otherwise negative points from reviews of the hardback. That website, conducted by the inspired Josh Timonen, has attracted an enormous number of contributors who have effectively eviscerated all of these criticisms, but in less guarded, more outspoken tones than my own, or than those of my academic colleagues, A.C. Grayling, Daniel Dennett, Paul Kurtz, Stephen Weinberg, and others who have done so in print, and whose comments are reproduced on the same website. You can't criticize religion without a detailed analysis of learned books of theology. Surprise bestseller? If I'd gone to town, as one self-consciously intellectual critic wished, on the epistemological differences between Aquinas and Duns Scotus, if I'd done justice to Regina on subjectivity, Ronner on grace, or Mottman on hope, as he vainly hoped I would, my book would have been more than a surprise bestseller. It would have been a miraculous one. But that is not the point. Unlike Stephen Hawking, who accepted advice at every formula he published, he would have his sales. Let's read that again. Unlike Stephen Hawking, who accepted advice at every formula he published, would have his sales, I would happily foregone bestsellerdom if there had been the slightest hope of Duns Scotus illuminating my central question of whether God exists. The vast majority of theological writings simply assume that he does, and go on from there. For my purposes, I need consider only those theologians who take seriously the possibility that God does not exist and argue that he does. This, I think, Chapter 3 achieves, with what I hope is good humor and sufficient comprehensiveness. When it comes to good humor, I cannot improve on the splendid courtier's reply published by P.Z. Myers on his Parangala website. I have considered the impudent accusations of Mr. Dawkins with exasperation at his lack of serious scholarship. He has apparently not read the detailed discourses of Count Rodrigo of Seville on the exquisite and exotic leathers of the Emperor's boots, nor does he give a moment's consideration to Benelli's masterwork on the luminescence of the Emperor's feathered hat. We have entire schools dedicated to writing learned treatises on the beauty of the Emperor's raiment, and every major newspaper runs a section dedicated to imperial fashion. Dawkins arrogantly ignores all these deep philosophical ponderings to crudely accuse the emperor of nudity. Until Dawkins has trained the shops of Paris and Milan, until he has learned to tell the difference between a ruffled flounce and a puffy pantaloon, we should all pretend he has not spoken out against the emperor's taste. His training in biology may give him the ability to recognize dangling genitalia when he sees it, but it has not taught him the proper appreciation of imaginary fabrics. Not sure why imaginary and fabrics are capitalized, but to extend that point, most of us happily disavow fairies, astrology, and the flying spaghetti monster without first immersing ourselves in the book of Pastafarian theology, etc. The next criticism is a related one: the great straw man offensive. You always attack the worst of religion and ignore the best. You go after crude, rabble-rousing chancers like Ted Haggard, Jerry Falwell, and Pat Robertson, rather than the sophisticated theologians like Tillich or Bonhoeffer, who teach the sort of religion I believe in. If only such subtle, nuanced religion predominated, the world would surely be a better place, and I would have written a different book. The melancholy truth is that this kind of understated, decent, revisionist religion is numerically negligible. To the vast majority of believers around the world, religion all too closely resembles what you hear from the likes of Robertson, Falwell, Haggard, Osama bin Laden, or Ayatollah Khomeini. These are not strong men. They are all too influential, and everybody in the modern world has to deal with them. I'm an atheist, but I wish to dissociate myself from your shrill, strident, intemperate, intolerant, ranting language. Actually, if you look at the language of the God Delusion, it is rather less shrill or intemperate than we regularly take in our stride. When listening to political commentators, for example, or theater, art, or book critics, here are some samples of recent restaurant criticism from leading London newspapers. It is difficult, if not impossible, to imagine anyone conjuring up a restaurant, even in their sleep, where the flood in its mediocrity comes so close to inedible. All things considered, quite the worst restaurant in London, maybe the world, serves horrendous food grudgingly in a room that is a museum to Italian waiters' taste circa 1976. The worst meal I've ever eaten, not by a small margin, I mean the worst, most unrelievedly awful. What looked like a sea mine in miniature was the most disgusting thing I've put in my mouth since I ate earthworms at school. The strongest language to be found in the God Delusion is tame and measured by comparison. If it sounds intemperate, it is only because of the weird convention almost universally accepted. See quotation from Douglas Adams on page 42 through 43. That religious faith is uniquely privileged, above and beyond criticism. Insulting a restaurant might seem trivial to compared to insulting God. Big G. The restaurateurs and chiefs really exist, and they have feelings to be hurt, whereas blasphemy, as the witty bumper sticker puts it, is a victimless crime. In 1915, the British Member of Parliament, Horatio Bottomley, recommended that after the war, if by chance you should discover one day in a restaurant you are being served by a German waiter, you will throw up a soup in his foul face. If you find yourself sitting at the side of a German clerk, you will spill the ink pot over his foul head. Now that's strident and intolerant, and I should have thought ridiculous and ineffective as rhetoric even in its own time. Contrast it with the open sentence of chapter 2, which is the passage most often quoted as strident or shrill. It is not for me to say whether I succeeded, but my intention was closer to robust but humorous broadside than shrill polemic. In public readings of the God Delusion, this was the one passage that is guaranteed to get a good-natured laugh, which is why my wife and I invariably use it as the warm-up act to break the ice with a new audience. If I could venture to suggest why the humor works, I think it is the incongruous mismatch between a subject that could have been strident or vulgarly expressed and the actual expression in a drawn-out list of Latinate or pseudo-scholarly works, filicidal, megalomaniacal, pestilential. My model here was one of the funniest writers. My model here was one of the funniest writers of the 20th century, and nobody could call Evelyn Waugh. Evelyn Waugh shrill or strident. I even gave the game away by mentioning his name in the anecdote that immediately follows on page 51. Book critics or theater critics can be derisively negative and gain delighted praise for the trenchant wit of their review. But in criticisms of religion, even clarity ceases to be a virtue and sounds like aggressive hostility. A politician may attack an opponent scathingly across the floor of the House and earn plaudits for his robust pugnancy. But let a soberly reasoning critic of religion employ what would, in other contexts, sound merely direct and forthright, and it will be described as a rant. Polite society will purse its lips and shake its head, even secular polite society, and especially that part of secular society that loves to announce, I'm an atheist, but you're only preaching to the choir. What's the point? Convert's Corner on richarddawkins.net gives the lie to its premise, but even taking it at face value, there are good answers. One is that the non-believing choir is a lot bigger than many people think, especially in America. But again, especially in America, it is largely a closet choir, and it desperately needs encouragement to come out. Judging by the thanks I received all over North America on my book tour, the encouragement that people like Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, and me are able to give is greatly appreciated. Christopher Hitchens. A more subtle reasoning for preaching to the choir is the need to raise consciousness. When the feminists raised our consciousness about sexist pronouns, they would have been preaching to the choir where the more substantive issues of the rights of women and the evils of discrimination against them were concerned. But that decent liberal choir still needed its consciousness raised with respect to everyday language. However, right on, we may have been on the political issues of rights and discrimination. We nevertheless still unconsciously bought into linguistic conventions that made half the human race feel excluded. There are other linguistic conventions that need to go the same way as sexist pronouns, and the atheist choir is not exempt. We all need our consciousness raised. Atheists as well as theists unconsciously observe society's convention that we must be especially polite and respectful to faith. And I never tire of drawing attention to society's tacit acceptance of the labeling of small children with religious opinions of their parents. Atheists need to raise their own consciousness of anomaly. Religious opinion is the one kind of parental opinion that, by almost universal consent, can be fastened upon children who are, in truth, too young to know what their opinion really is. There is no such thing as a Christian child, only a child of Christian parents. Seize every opportunity to ram it home. You are just as much a fundamentalist as those you criticize. No, please, it's all too easy to mistake passion that can change its mind for fundamentalism, which never will. Fundamentalist Christians are passionately opposed to evolution, and I am passionately in favor of it. Let's go evolution. Passion for passion. We are evenly matched, and that, according to some, means we are equally fundamentalists. But, to borrow an aphorism whose source I am unable to pin down, When two opposite points of view are expressed with equal force, the truth does not necessarily lie midway between them. It is possible for one side to be simply wrong, and that justifies passion on the other side. Fundamentalists know what they believe, and they know nothing will change their minds. The quotation from Kirk Wise on page 323 says it all. If all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it. But I would still be a creationist because that is the word of God. Because that is what the word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand. It is impossible to overstress the difference between such a passionate commitment to biblical fundamentals and the true scientist's equally passionate commitment to evidence. The fundamentalist Kurt Wise proclaims that all evidence in the universe would not change his mind. The true scientist, however, passionately may believe in evolution. He knows exactly what it would take to change his mind. The true scientist, however, passionately may believe in evolution, but knows exactly what it would take to change his mind. Evidence. As J.B.S. Haldane said, when asked what evidence might contradict evolution, fossil rabbits in the Precambrian. Let me coin my own opposite version of Kirk Wise's manifesto. If all the evidence in the universe turned in favor of creationism, I would be the first to admit it, and I would immediately change my mind. As things stand, however, all available evidence, and there is a vast amount of it, favors evolution. It is for this reason, and this reason alone, that I argue for evolution with passion that matches the passion of those who argue against it. My passion is based on evidence. Theirs, flying in the face of evidence as it does, is truly fundamentalist. I'm an atheist myself, but religion is here to stay. Live with it. If you want to get rid of religion, good luck to you. You think you can get rid of religion? What planet are you living on? Religion is a fixture. Get over it. I could bear any of these downers if they were uttered in something approaching a tone of regret or concern. On the contrary, the tone of voice is sometimes downright gleeful. I don't think it's masochism. More probably, we can put it down to belief in belief again. These people may not be religious themselves, but they love the idea that other people are religious. This brings me to my final category of naysayers. I'm an atheist myself, but people need religion. My jury's still out on that one. Where are you going to put in its place? How are you going to comfort the bereaved? How are you going to feel the need? What patronizing condescension? What patronizing condescension? You and I, of course, are much too intelligent and well educated to need religion. But ordinary people, hoi, polloi, the Orwellian prose, the Huxleyan deltas, the epsilon semi-morons need religion. I'm reminded of an occasion when I was lecturing at a conference on the public understanding of science, and I briefly inveighed against dumbing down. In the question and answer section at the end, one member of the audience stood up and suggested that dumbing down might be necessary to bring minorities and women to science. This tone of voice told that he genuinely thought he was being liberal and progressive. I can just imagine what the women and minorities in the audience thought about it. Returning to humanity's need for comfort, it is, of course, real, but isn't there something childish in the belief that the universe owes us comfort as of right? Isaac Asimov's remark about infantilism of pseudoscience is just as applicable to religion. Inspect every piece of pseudoscience and you'll find a security blanket, a thumb to suck, a skirt to hold. It is astonishing, moreover, how many people are unable to understand that X is comforting does not imply that X is true. So just because something is comforting doesn't make it true. A related plaint concerns the need for a purpose in life. To quote one Canadian critic, the atheist may be right about God, who knows? But God or no God, it's clear that something in the human soul requires a belief that life has a purpose that transcends the material plane. One would think that a more rational than thou empiricist such as Dawkins would recognize this unchanging aspect of human nature. Does Dawkins really think this world would be a more humane place if we all looked to the God Delusion instead of the Bible for truth and comfort? Actually, yes. Since you mentioned humane, yes, I do. But I must repeat yet again, the consolation content of a belief does not raise its truth value. Of course, I cannot deny the need for emotional comfort, and I cannot claim that the worldview adopted in this book offers any more than moderate comfort too, for example, the bereaved. But if the comfort that religion seems to offer is founded on the neurologically highly implausible premise that we survive the death of our brains, do you really want to defend it? In any case, I don't think that I have ever met anyone at a funeral who dissents from the view that the non-religious parts, eulogies, the deceased favorite poems, or music are more moving than the prayers. Having read The God Delusion, Dr. David Ashton, a British consultant physician, wrote to me on the unexpected death on Christmas Day 2006 of his beloved 17-year-old son, Luke. Shortly before Luke's death, the two of them had talked appreciatively of the charitable foundation that I'm setting up to encourage reason and science. At Luke's funeral on the Isle of Man, his father suggested to the congregation that if they wished to make any kind of contribution in Luke's memory, they should send it to my foundation, as Luke would have wished. The 30 checks received amounted to more than 2,000 euro, I think, including more than, or pounds, 2,000 pounds, including more than 600 pounds from a whip round in the local village pub. This boy was obviously much loved. When I read the order of service for the funeral ceremony, I literally wept, although I had never met Luke, and I asked for permission to reproduce it at richarddawkins.net. A lone piper played the Max Lament Ellen Vannon. Two friends spoke eulogies. Dr. Ashton himself recited Dylan Thomas's beautiful poem, Fern Hill. Now, as I was young and easy under the apple boughs, so achingly evocative of lost youth. And then, I catch my breath to report, he read the opening lines of my own Unweaving the Rainbow, lines that I've long earmarked for my own funeral. Obviously, there are exceptions, but I suspect that for many people, the main reason they cling to religion is not that it is consoling, but that they have been let down by our educational system, and that they don't realize that non-belief is even an option. I've never heard that take before. This is certainly true of most people who think they are creationists. They have simply not been properly taught Darwin's astounding alternative. Probably the same is true of the belittling myth that people need religion. As a recent conference in 2006, an anthropologist and prize specimen of I'm an atheist Buttery, quoted Golda Meir when asked whether she believed in God. I believe in the Jewish people, and the Jewish people believe in God. Our anthropologist substituted his own version. I believe in people, and people believe in God. I prefer to say that I believe in people, and people, when given the right encouragement to think for themselves about all the information now available, very often turn out not to believe in God and lead fulfilled and satisfied, indeed liberated lives. In this new paperback edition, I have taken the opportunity to make a few minor improvements and correct some small errors that readers of the hardback have kindly drawn to my attention. Preface. As a child, my wife hated her school and wished she could leave. Years later, when she was in her 20s, she disclosed this unhappy fact to her parents, and her mother was aghast. But darling, why didn't you come to us and tell us? Layla's reply is my text for today. But I didn't know I could. I didn't know I could. I suspect, well, I'm sure, there are lots of people out there who have been brought up in some religion or other, are unhappy in it, don't believe in it, or are worried about the evils that are done in its name. People who feel vague yearnings to leave their parents' religion and wish they could, but just don't realize that leaving is an option. If you're one of them, this book is for you. It is intended to raise consciousness to the fact that to be an atheist is a realistic aspiration, and a brave and splendid one. You can be an atheist who is happy, balanced, moral, intellectually fulfilled. That is the first of my conscious raising messages. I also want to raise consciousness in three other ways, which I'll come on to. In January 2006, I presented a two-part television documentary on British television, Channel 4, called Root of All Evil. From the start, I didn't like the title and fought it hard. Religion is not the root of all evil. For one thing, for no one thing is the root of all anything. But I was delighted with the advertisement that Channel 4 put in the national newspapers. It was a picture of the Manhattan skyline with the caption, "Imagine a world without religion." What's the connection? The twin towers of the World Trade Center were conspicuously present. Imagine, with John Lennon, a world with no religion. Imagine no suicide bombers, no 9/11, no 7/7, no crusades, no witch hunts, no gunpowder plot, no Indian partition, no Israeli-Palestine wars, no Serb, Croatian, Muslim massacres, no persecution of Jews as Christ killers, no Northern Ireland troublers, no honor killings, no shiny-suited but faint-haired televangelists fleecing gullible people out of their money. God wants you to give till it hurts. Imagine no Taliban to blow up ancient statues, no public beheadings of blasphemers, no flogging of female skin for the crime of showing an inch of it. Incidentally, my colleague Desmond Morris informs me that John Lennon's magnificent song is sometimes performed in America with the phrase, "and no religion too," expurgated. One version even has the effrontery to change it to and one religion too. Perhaps you feel that agnosticism is a reasonable position, but that atheism is just as dogmatic as religious belief. If so, I hope Chapter 2 will change your mind by persuading you that the God hypothesis is a scientific hypothesis about the universe, which should be analyzed as skeptically as any other. Perhaps you have been taught that philosophers and theologians have put forward good reasons to believe in God. If you think that, you might enjoy Chapter 3 on arguments for God's existence. The arguments turn out to be spectacularly weak. Maybe you think it is obvious that God must exist, for how else could the world have come into being? How else could there be life in all its rich diversity, with every species looking uncannily as though it had been designed? If your thoughts were along those lines, I hope you will gain enlightenment from Chapter 4, why there almost certainly is no God. Far from pointing to a designer, the illusion of design in the living world is explained with far greater economy and with devastating elegance by Darwinian natural selection. And while natural selection itself is limited to explaining the living world, it raises our consciousness to the likelihood of comparable explanatory cranes that may aid our understanding of the cosmos itself. The power of cranes, such as natural selection, is the second of my 4 consciousness razors. Perhaps you think there must be a God or gods because anthropologists and historians report that believers dominate every human culture. If you find that convincing, please refer to Chapter 5 on the roots of religion, which explains why belief is so ubiquitous. Or do you think that religious belief is necessary in order for us to have justifiable morals? Don't we need God in order to be good? Please read chapters 6 and 7 to see why this is not so. Yeah, this part sounds familiar as I've done a little bit of study myself. Turns out that both atheists and believers actually have morals. Chapter 8 will invite you to think about ways in which religion is not such a good thing for the world. If you feel trapped in religion of your upbringing, it would be worth asking yourself how this came about. The answer is usually some form of childhood indoctrination. If you are religious at all, it is overwhelmingly probable that your religion is that of your parents. If you were born in Arkansas and you think Christianity is true and Islam is false, knowing full well that you would think the opposite if you had been born in Afghanistan, you are a victim of childhood indoctrination. Mutatis mutandis, if you were born in Afghanistan. The whole matter of religion and childhood is the subject of Chapter 9, which also includes my 3rd consciousness razor. Just as feminists whine that they hear the he rather than he or she, or man rather than human, I want everybody to flinch whenever we hear a phrase such as Catholic child or Muslim child. Well, actually, the he pronoun. Richard Dawkins, you are technically supposed to use the he or she. There are studies that show that if you use he or she, that women or small children have more of an idea and belief that they can become doctors, scientists, and these things like that. But I get your drift. If a child of Catholic parents, if you like, but if you hear anybody speak of a Catholic child, stop them and politely point that children are too young to know where they stand on such issues, just as they're too young to know where they stand on economics or politics. And if you want to know where that's from the other half of the psychology of women, the other half of human existence, something like that. Precisely because my purpose is consciousness raising, I shall not apologize for mentioning it here in the preface as well as in Chapter 9. You can't say it too often. I'll say it again. That is not a Muslim child, but a child of Muslim parents. That child is too young to know whether it is a Muslim or not. There is no such thing as a Muslim child. There is no such thing as a Christian child. Chapters 1 and 10 top the tail. Chapters 1 and 10 top and tail the book by explaining in their different ways how a proper understanding of the magnificence of the real world, while never becoming a religion, can fill the inspirational role that religion has historically and inadequately usurped. A person as a clinical psychologist or clinical psychology student, psychology graduate, I think that there is a role for religion, and I think that people having faith is a good thing, but obviously knowing about different things and coexisting, as one would call it, is definitely a fruitful endeavor. My fourth consciousness razor is atheist pride. Being an atheist is nothing to be apologetic about. On the contrary, it is something to be proud of, standing tall to face the far horizon. For atheism nearly always indicates a healthy independence of mind and indeed a healthy mind. There are many people who know in their heart of hearts that they are atheists, but dare not admit it to their families or even in some cases to themselves. Partly, this is because the word atheist has been assiduously built up as a terrible and frightening label. Chapter 9 quotes comedian Julia Sweeney's tragic comedy story of her parents' discovery through reading a newspaper that she had become an atheist. Not believing in God, they could just about take but an atheist. An atheist? The mother's voice rose to a scream. I need to say something to American readers in particular at this point, for the religiosity of today's America is something truly remarkable. Lawyer Wendy Kaminer was exaggeratingly only slightly when she remarked that making fun of religion is as risky as burning a flag in an American Legion Hall. Oh, thank goodness I still have my flag flying outside, or put up outside. The status of an atheist in America today is on par with that of homosexuals 50 years ago. Now, after the gay pride movement, it is possible, though still not very easy, for a homosexual to be elected to public office. A Gallup poll taken in 1999 asked Americans whether they would vote for an otherwise well-qualified person who was a woman. 95% would. Roman Catholic, 94% would. Jew, 92% would. Black, 92%. Mormon, 79%. Homosexual, 79%. Or atheist, 49%. Clearly, we have a long way to go. But atheists are a lot more numerous, especially among the educated elite, than many realize. This was so even in the 19th century when John Stuart Mill was already able to say, "The world would be astonished if it knew how great a proportion of the brightest ornaments of those most distinguished, even in popular estimation for wisdom and virtue, are complete skeptics in religion." This must be even truer today, and indeed, I present evidence for it in chapter 3. The reason so many people don't notice atheists is that many of us are reluctant to come out. My dream is that this book may help people to come out. exactly as in the case of the gay movement. The more people come out, the easier it will be for others to join them. There may be a critical mass for the initiation of a chain reaction. American polls suggest that atheists and agnostics far outnumber religious Jews and even outnumber most other particular religious groups. Unlike Jews, however, who are notoriously one of the most effective political lobbies in the United States, and unlike evangelical Christians who wield even greater political power, atheists and agnostics are not organized and therefore exert almost zero influence. Indeed, organizing atheists has been compared to herding cats. Herding cats because they tend to think independently and will not conform to authority. But a good first step would be to build up a critical mass, one of those willing to come out, thereby encouraging others to do so. Even if they can't be herded, cats in sufficient numbers can make a lot of noise, and they cannot be ignored. The word delusion in my title has disquieted some psychiatrists who regard it as a technical term, not to be bandied about. Yeah, I can agree with that. Just like the terms in the past for intellectual disability, such as moron or imbecile. Those were technical terms that professionals use, psychologists like to label a person's intellectual capacity on certain domains in the past. Three of them wrote to me to propose a special technical term for religious delusion. Relusion. Maybe it'll catch on. But for now, I'm going to stick with delusion, and I need to justify my use of it. The Penguin English Dictionary defines a delusion as a false belief or impression. Surprisingly, the illustrative quotation the dictionary gives is from Philip E. Johnson. Darwinism is the story of humanity's liberation from the delusion that its destiny is controlled by a power higher than itself. Can that be the same Philip E. Johnson who leads the creationist charge against Darwinism in America today? Indeed, it is. And the quotation is, as we might guess, taken out of context. I hope the fact that I have stated as much will be noted, since the same courtesy has not been extended to me in numerous creationist quotations of my work, deliberately and misleadingly taken out of context. Whatever Johnson's own meaning, his science, as it stands, is one that I would be happy to endorse. The dictionary supplied with Microsoft Word creates a delusion as a persistent false belief held in the face of strong contradictory evidence, especially as a symptom of psychiatric disorder. The first part captures religious faith perfectly. As to whether it is a symptom of a psychiatric disorder, I am inclined to follow Robert M. Pirsig, author of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. When one person suffers from a delusion, it is called insanity. When many people suffer from a delusion, it is called religion. If this book works as I intend, religious readers who open it will be atheists when they put it down. What presumptuous optimism. Of course, dyed in the wool faith heads are immune to argument. Their resistance built up over years of childhood indoctrination using methods that took centuries to mature, whether by evolution or design. Among the more effective immunological devices is a dire warning to avoid even opening a book like this, which is surely a work of Satan. But I believe there are plenty of open-minded people out there, people whose childhood indoctrination was not too insidious, or for other reasons didn't take, or those native intelligence, or or whose native intelligence is strong enough to overcome it. Such free spirits should need only a little encouragement to break free of the vice of religion altogether. At very last, I hope that nobody who reads this book will be able to say, I didn't know I could. At very last. For help in the preparation of this book, I am grateful to many friends and colleagues. I cannot mention them all, but they include my literary agent, John Brockman, and my editors, Sally Gaminara for Transworld, and Eamon Dolan for Houghton Mifflin, both of whom read the book with sensitivity and intelligent understanding, and give me a helpful mixture of criticism and advice. Their wholehearted and enthusiastic belief in this book was very encouraging to me. Gillian Summerskills has been an exemplary copy editor, as constructive with her suggestions as she was meticulous with her corrections. Others who criticize various drafts, and to whom I am very grateful, are Jerry Cohn, J. Anderson Thompson, R. Elizabeth Cornell, Ursula Goodenough, Latha Menon, and especially Karen Owens, critic extraordinaire, whose acquaintance with the stitching and unstitching of every draft of this book has been almost as detailed as my own. The book owes something, and vice versa, to the two-part television documentary, Root of All Evil, which I presented on British television, Channel 4, in January of 2006. I am grateful to all who were involved in the production, including Deborah Kidd, Russell Barnes, Tim Craig, Adam Prescott, Alan Clements, and Hamish Maikura. For permission to use quotations from the documentary, I thank IWC Media and Channel 4. Root of All Evil achieved excellent ratings in Britain, and it has also been taken by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. It remains to be seen whether any U.S. television channel will dare to show it. This book has been developing in my mind for some years. During that time, some of the ideas inevitably found their way into lectures. For example, my tenor lectures at Harvard and articles in newspapers and magazines. Readers of my regular column, Free Inquiry, especially, may find certain passages familiar. I'm grateful to Tom Flynn, the editor of that admirable magazine, for the stimulus he gave me when he commissioned me to become a regular columnist. After a temporary hiatus during the finishing of the book, I hope now to resume my column, and will no doubt use it to respond to the aftermath of the book. For a variety of reasons, I'm grateful to Dan Dennett, Mark Halser, Michael Stryatt, Sam Harris, Helen Fisher, Margaret Downing, Ivan Warak, Hermione Lee, Julia Sweeney, Dan Barker, Josephine Welsh, Ian Bard, and especially George Scales. Nowadays, a book such as this is not complete until it becomes the nucleus of a living website, a forum for supplementary materials, reactions, discussions, questions, and answers. Who knows what the future may bring? I hope that www.richarddawkins.net, the website of Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, will come to fill that role. And I am extremely grateful to Josh Timonen for the artistry, professionalism, and sheer hard work that he is putting into it. Above all, I thank my wife, Layla Ward, who has coaxed me through all my hesitations and self-doubts, not just with moral support and witty suggestions for improvement, but my reading the entire book aloud to me at two different stages in its development, so I could apprehend very directly how it might seem to a reader other than myself. I recommend the technique to other authors, but I must warn that for best results, the reader must have a professional actor with a voice and ear sensitively tuned to the music of language. And this is chapter 1, a deeply religious non-believer. Okay, I'll save chapter 1 for the next video because this video is 55 minutes. Thank you.